Okay, we're alive.
We're
Gene,
live.
so glad you made it in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a few weeks, and what you do is incredibly unique, especially for Kansas City. So you're the owner, co-founder of Security, a cybersecurity managed service provider company.
Not really managed services, more services and solutions.
Okay.
So, but it's probably more apt. Yeah.
Nice. So you and I met. We met maybe a few months back now, and we kind of connect some dots and have some kind of similar backgrounds in terms of kind of where we all came from. But yeah, I just want to learn a little bit more about your background, your family history, because I think it ties into with what your business is today.
Sure. That's interesting. Yeah. Essentially, I was born in the former Soviet Union in 1978. So I'm really, really old. And my parents immigrated from the Soviet Union to the United States in 1980. So I was 2 when we arrived, both from Jewish backgrounds, and kind of did the typical immigrant thing, very kind of blue collar upbringing. My parents worked a lot of different jobs, and over time we kind of moved. Initially moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and then Overland Park, and then kind of ended up in Olathe later. So. Pretty interesting start, right? They moved to the United States obviously for opportunity. I'm an only child, so they didn't really want to send their only kid to the military at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1980 they got the opportunity to come over, and so they took it, and I'm glad that they did.
And you have no recollection of that process coming over from Russia?
Not much. I mean, I remember I have a kind of a vague memory of being like in either preschool or preschool and like not knowing English well. So I remember that, but for the most part, it just felt really organic and natural. So yeah, I felt like I grew up here.
When you were that little, did you feel like an outsider, especially coming into Kansas City at that time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think probably up until the point I was in my kind of high school, post-high school years, you kind of feel a little bit different. We grew up in a very kind of middle-class environment, so there weren't many people from cultural backgrounds as us, predominantly, Christian, white, typical stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I'm like the only person with immigrant parents that I really knew, and then, as a kid, you're like, damn it, I just wish, you guys would be more normal, And then you get older and you realize, wow, it's a special thing, and it's pretty cool. So, yeah, I definitely felt... not really, separated from everyone else, but just different for sure.
Which is not a bad thing.
No, not at all. No.
So, were you into IT? Were you into tech stuff at all growing up? Like high school, middle school?
Yeah. So middle school a little bit. So it's kind of funny. When my parents moved to Olathe, Kansas, when I was like in 6th grade, and I had wanted them to buy a computer. And I'll date myself here. The first computer that we actually bought was a 286 10 megahertz system from some really questionable guy on the other side of town. So it was like bought from a guy that built this thing.
And what year is this?
In the 90s.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know when. I could do the math, but we bought this computer, and back then, obviously the internet existed, but it was bulletin board system. So you dial out, right? You get an account on a bulletin board system. And so I did that, and had a 1200 baud modem. And that kind of abruptly ended when I got some bulletin board software to run for myself, and had, I think it was like Southwestern Bell or some at the time, add a bunch of lines at my parents' house in the basement. And so I started my own bulletin board system until they got the first bill. My parents kind of freaked out. We're like, listen, what is this, right? Why do we have 4 lines in the basement? So that was like my first kind of, unusual. I didn't know anyone else that really knew much about, computers or bulletin board systems. And then, kind of later, I got back into it. I kind of got more into like music. I've been a musician my whole life. And then when I say later, like a few years later, you kind of had not necessarily the internet. Internet was kind of starting mainstream, the AOL days, and I kind of got back into things there, which led to a job in kind of the internet provider world, and that kind of kicked off my career at that point.
So you didn't go to college for?
No. In fact, I'm a high school dropout.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And now you own your company.
Yeah.
How many times we hear that kind of story?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, I literally, was doing the music thing, and it was my junior year of high school, and I think it was around probably this time of year. I dropped out, got my GED, and didn't look back. My parents were terrified, right? Coming from, the background they come from, it was like you have
and the only child.
Yeah, the only child. They're like, I might as well told them I was a serial killer, right? It was about the same reaction. And kind of went and did the band thing for a while and always worked, right? So work jobs and was lucky enough in that time. I worked a lot of different kind of jobs. I probably had more jobs than anyone that I know, right? I worked since I was, 14 years old, right? And my first real IT job was at a small internet service company. I got hired as a tech support person, and it was kind of a crazy environment, but it was really awesome. And
Were you 20 at this time?
No, I'm like 16, 17.
And do you have any IT skills at this point?
So I have my kind of initial skills, right? But no, I didn't know anything about radius or internet internet service that much. And it was an interesting position because I came into this company. I'm a tech support guy. The guy that started and ran the company was a really brilliant engineer, but probably not such a great businessman. So I was kind of left to my own devices. So things would break and I would just have to fix them. And initially, that was kind of, reboot some stuff, and then you kind of dig a little bit deeper. So it was really, by definition of the phrase, trial by fire. And that's really what it was, but it was really pretty awesome in retrospect.
Okay, so you're 16 years old. You dropped out of high school.
Yeah.
You're working an entry-level tech job.
Yeah, 16, 17, something like that, yeah.
Okay, and you're still in Kansas City.
Yep.
Okay. At some point, you move away.
Yeah, well, so it's a little slower. So I kind of did the tech support thing for, I don't know, a couple years, something like that, a year or two. And then I got an opportunity to be kind of the sole network administrator at a small software company. So I went and did that. Got to work with a really great CTO, CIO type that really kind of built this software company. And then from that job, actually parlayed to a job at Fishnet Security in town that Gary Fish started.
What year was this when you started with Fishnet?
Gosh, probably 2000, something like that.
And what year did they start?
They started a few years before, I want to say.
Okay.
It was still a pretty small company when I joined. In fact, small world, Gary Fish was actually a tech support person at the software company that I worked at before I was there. And I got introduced to him through this CTO, who's still a really good friend of mine. So Gary was awesome enough to give me an opportunity. And I started as a security engineer and then kind of moved into, really just the inception of the assessment practice at that point. And then after, a few years there, ended up moving to New York kind of on a whim in Manhattan. Spent some time in Manhattan there, moved to Boston, and then ended up back in Kansas City.
So tell me a little bit more about New York and Boston.
Yeah. So New York.
So did you get recruited from FishTech to go to?
It was Fishnet at the time, so not FishTech, who eventually became Optiv. No, so I was 25 years old, went on a trip to New York City with a good friend of mine, came back, broke up with my girlfriend, and was like, I'm moving to New York. And then, Fishnet was nice enough to basically say, listen, why don't you kind of start an office, there. And then I kind of moved into they had a software side of the company that I did a little bit of work for there. Time in New York. So I was fortunate enough, again, to not have to go, and look for a job there or anything else. And then, after some time there, I moved to Boston to kind of do the professional musician thing. So I got an opportunity there, took a break from IT for a year. I went to Boston and did the band thing, and it was a great experience too.
Wow.
Was planning on moving back to New York City because I loved New York City, was great. And on a Thanksgiving trip back home, ended up meeting my now wife, and the rest is history. And
so you said, okay, I'm gonna come back to Kansas City, and then I'm gonna get back into tech.
Yeah.
Okay, and how did you? So you're probably in your late 20s by this point? 26, 27?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you started Depth?
So good question. So that was 12 years ago. I'm 40 years old now. So
28, 27?
That doesn't sound right. Was I that young? Must have been.
Yeah.
Wow. A lot of times passed. So yeah, that sounds about right.
And did you start on your own? Were you with a buddy?
So kind of with a buddy, kind of interesting story. So when I came back to town, I didn't just start Depth. I worked at H&R Block for a few years on the security team, which is a great experience. And we went through a big data center move at the time. It was like the first building downtown. It was the Block building that's there now. And so me and one of the guys that's still one of the partners, Jason Cowley at Depth, kind of decided we were going to kind of jump off with a couple other people from Block at the time that ended up kind of not staying around the business, kind of figured that out in the first year, I would say, or two.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the whole idea was really, we've kind of done this work on the corporate side,
Mm-hmm.
and we can either move jobs or stay,
Mm-hmm.
or we can try and start our own company, and if it doesn't work out, you can just go get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how Dep started. Really just kind of no massive plans. We had one big customer, which helped. Kind of our first customer that's still proud to say a customer today. Yeah, that's kind of how it kicked off.
And you said Jason, right? Is it,
Yeah, Jason, yep.
Did he have the same technical background as you?
Yeah, so Jason was actually, when I met him, he was on the infrastructure side at H&R Block, kind of doing all the Active Directory, all things kind of Microsoft related.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought him onto the security team when I came onto the security team.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got a real good chance to work together. And, the guy, to this day, probably one of the fastest learning curves that I've ever seen. And,
Mm-hmm.
Just a great person to be around. So it was a pretty easy jump at that point.
Okay. I've seen a lot of hurdles with people, especially in the tech sector, trying to go out and start their own. Not only is it a lot of folks don't have that business side, but getting partners and having a good mix of skill set. Because if you have 2 partners, 3 partners that are all doing the same thing,
Yeah.
you're missing a big part of operations and how
Sure.
to run the business. So what was that like the first couple of years? Were you guys just focused on servicing the clients and getting the checks going, getting that payroll going? Was that the primary focus?
I think like most kind of professional services organizations that start, right? You don't have to go and get a bunch of capital to do that, right? You're using kind of your skills and your know-how. So consulting services orgs, right, or being a freelancer, whatever, is pretty easy to begin, right? At the beginning for us, it was a really kind of a basic idea. We saw a need and a demand for the type of things that we were capable of doing. When we were on the other end trying to procure people and companies to do this work, we had a mixed bag of experiences. And so we thought we would jump off and just do really, really good work. And so for us, it was there wasn't a lot of thought. So I think a lot of companies start by some entrepreneurial individual that's usually pretty sales and marketing savvy, that kind of goes and says, hey, I want to do this, and the technical is an afterthought. Dep started completely the opposite. It was all about quality over quantity. We're just going to try and do really, really good work and fill this perceived gap that we saw. And we really didn't think about much else. So for us, it really started as like, great, we have a client at this point. There's kind of a long-term project. This is a great jumping off point. Let's just go crush it. And the next one will hopefully come. And that's just how it started.
I've seen, being in IT for 7 years, I've seen a big push for it in the last couple of years. And it's almost the push has been more just like education about cybersecurity, about how vulnerable companies are, especially a lot of the old school companies in Kansas City that have never had an IT department, especially banks and financial or agricultural companies, just started taking interest in their IT department a decade ago.
Sure.
Not, the cybersecurity side has been an afterthought. It's just now starting to become a thought, I think, now in the previous 2 years. So what was it like 12 years ago, 13 years ago, trying to sell cybersecurity when a lot of people were just making the transition into the IT world?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, think about it 20 years ago. So not even 12, right? I think, this is a market that is kind of ever expanding. So we're still in an expansion, right? And it's morphing and changing. There was certainly way more awareness. So you step back 20 years ago, there weren't headlines often that said company X was breached and this many records, kind of out. At the same time, there wasn't as much stuff happening kind of online either. You weren't banking online as readily. You weren't sending money. You weren't, we do everything online. You can order coffee online.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting that the space has grown. I think there's been a lot of maturity. When I step back and look at it, from a non-skeptical standpoint, I think that there's a lot of growth that's occurred, not just in size, but in maturity from an IT security standpoint, a lot more awareness. But I think that there's just a long, long way to go. And I think when you look at industries like the financial world where they can calculate risk very, very well, they have models that predict it with some certainty and consistency. I think in the IT security or cybersecurity world, whatever you want to call it, we have a real difficult time quantifying and also predicting things. And I think that is where the immaturity really sticks out. It's really difficult to kind of to ascertain where you're at, how good it is, and I think companies struggle with that all the time, even today.
How have you guys shifted in maybe your day-to-day, your focus? Because you can always, what you said, your first focus was just focus on quality.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's still there.
Absolutely.
But how has it changed as you hire more people? There's more spinning wheels.
Yeah.
And just keeping it all together while having your stamp of approval and everything.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think in a lot of ways, the fact that we're really three technical people that kind of are Jake, Jason, and myself, right? That are founders of the company, own the company. I think that really helps, right? So that's our world, that's our comfort zone. So we're very comfortable understanding, quantifying, kind of where we're at in the spectrum of quality, right? Mm-hmm. I think that some of the other sides, the sales and the marketing and some of the other typical business entrepreneur stuff are probably areas where we haven't focused a whole lot, until really recently in the past few years. So quality's always been centric to kind of who we are. And if you look at really what we want to be, that we've really sat down and took a look at, last few years as well, as opposed to just kind of doing stuff, you have to be a little bit more strategic about it. We want to be, the bar by other companies that do what we do are measured by. I mean, that's what we want, mm-hmm. right? That's kind of, who we want to be when we grow up. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of ways we're that today, certainly, locally, regionally, what have you. But quality's been centric to it. I think as things have changed, and as you grow, if you asked me 5 or 6 years ago how we scaled depth, and we had customers that would ask us that, and clients would say, "Listen, it's great. You guys are 4 people now. How are you going to get to 10? What are you going to do?" Mm-hmm. There's a question mark now that we've grown a little bit, and we've got some really talented guys on the team. We feel a lot more confident about that scalability. In that the model works, and mm-hmm. it works as you scale it up. It's not easy, especially in an environment like this, but we go to great lengths to maintain that quality, and that's the kind of integrity we want to have as we move forward. I mean, it's of the utmost importance to us.
Did you guys ever think about, I don't know if you have it or not, but part of your products and services, do you guys have any tools for the individual consumer, or is it just for companies? Yeah,
just for companies. So a lot of what we do is really kind of offensive services, right? Like penetration testing, red team, application security assessments, and that type of thing. We do resell a handful of products, really on kind of the defensive side today. Mm-hmm. And that's, I don't want to say a diminished part of our business. We want to be the offensive and defensive player. In some of those areas, we're kind of the experts, in a few of those products. Nationwide, or in some cases probably maybe even the world. Mm-hmm. But the real goal for us is we want to have both sides, right, to be able to not be just the guys that find the problems, but can help companies correct some of the issues from a strategic standpoint as well as tactical. But yeah, I mean, for us it's really about both sides as much as it is one.
What do you think, because right now from my perspective, I can find almost, if any person has somewhat of a presence online, whether they have one social media account, just one, and I have a first and last name and a state, I can find those folks.
So you're a stalker, is what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and anybody really can. The tools are at your fingertips with Google and whatnot, and I think that kind of vulnerability is new, mm-hmm. to be able to peer into each other's lives from a social media aspect. It makes me uncomfortable in a way. But how do you because I think people are left vulnerable. I mean, you can go steal an identity fairly easy.
Sure.
And I've seen the stats with how prevalent that is even per day. Yeah. How do you think there's going to be a big shift in that? Do you think that's more of an individual versus a company?
I mean, I think it's clearly more individual, mm-hmm. right? I think that the game has changed. Let's step back, right? So if you meet somebody, right, and they want to find out about Peyton, mm-hmm. right? 30 years ago, they'd ask friends of friends, and they'd say, "Oh, I know him. He's a great guy," mm-hmm. or
word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth, right? And that's all you had, right? Mm-hmm. Now we live in this kind of digital world. The scary thing is anything you post online is kind of available forever, right? It doesn't really go away even when you think it goes away. So the game has changed in that it's accessible to everyone, even people that don't know you or don't know someone that you know. But I think when you really look at it, it just comes down to, it is an individual responsibility. I think that it comes down to, don't share the things you don't want everyone to know, right? If that's the case, right? You've seen a bunch of cases in the, probably the last decade or so where employers are getting more savvy and, looking at like, social media and other things to kind of ascertain, well, what is this person? What's the character like? And sometimes they may be looking at a picture of a person that's 10 years old, but at the end of the day, if you're sharing it online, it's going to be forever.
Yeah. So I remember a few years back, I'm sure when you remember when Target got hacked into?
Of course, yeah.
Was that 5 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, maybe 5 or 7 years ago.
I heard that they were able to get into the network through an open router in one of their random stores. That was how they were able to gain access. How do you prevent something like that?
Yeah, so
is it preventable?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends. So if you take a look at any kind of an organization that has a lot of locations, right? And those locations are interconnected in these cases. So, how do you prevent? So think about like banks with branches, right? Or retail stores, as in the Target case, or anything else that has a lot of locations. So they can either be disconnected and, share data in different ways, not, be connected to the mothership, so to speak, or, they can be connected, which is kind of the more traditional way that we've seen things done. In the past, it was over things like frame relay or VPN, now a lot of MPLS and maybe some VPN as well. The key there is basic blocking and tackling. It's access control, right? It's making sure that only the things that need to be available are available. It's also, outside of just the access control, the network side is understanding how those systems operate. So things like Microsoft Active Directory, which runs most organizations, how domain connected systems can be exploited, understanding like what that attack chain looks like is important, how to prevent it, because things like basic network access and only having things allowed that need to be doesn't really stop that attack. When you start talking about, well, I've got systems here, they're on the domain, they have to talk home, right? We have file shares and other things there too. So you really have to understand how these attacks occur in order to be able to defend against them. And that's where I think a lot of the gaps are on the corporate information security side. We live in offense, all the people on the offensive side. And so we know every way around, every bypass of security controls, because we do that every day, day in, day out. The defenders, their job is much more difficult, right? So we have to find one thing wrong once. They have to do everything right all the time. And so I think that how these things happen and how you defend against them is really starting with the attack rather than just thinking we're going to guess all the permutations of how this bad stuff can happen and try to do that blocking and tackling. I think you have to start with like what's like real world, what can happen from an attack standpoint, almost like threat modeling. And then what do we have in place to detect, prevent these things and kind of go down the road. And I think we're backwards on the defense side because a lot of times we're doing what we think should be done. And, I hear a lot of emphasis sometimes on like, controlling network access or restricting it. So it's like firewalls, right? Which is great. And it's basic blocking and tackling. But sometimes, we break into an organization's network through one flaw in an application or, some other kind of thing that seems esoteric. And people kind of look at it and say, well, wait a second, we're doing all the right stuff, we're compliant. Really you have to start with attack, I think is the key.
Is your space with where you have to stay on top of things, do you have to think like a hacker? Or do you have to be up to date with maybe tools or ways that they are
all of the
penetrating?
Above, right? And so, I don't do the offensive work myself anymore, obviously. We've got much, much smarter people than me in depth that do it. But yeah, the game changes. So what I will say is that over 12 years, when I look at a year ago, what a common attack scenario looks like from a penetration test or a red team engagement at depth, it's changed pretty drastically. And so it changes because the opportunities, get smaller in those other areas, new tools and techniques occur, and new defenses come up, right? So, all the above shifts the attacker. And so, from our standpoint, yes, we have to think like an attacker. We have to execute like an attacker. We have to do all of those things. And in the real world, an attacker has unlimited amounts of time, right? We're on a timetable, so we kind of have to be better than the attacker sometimes. On the flip side, we're not monetizing the things that we do, right? So an attacker may break into a network and want to figure out a way to make, turn that into dollars and cents. for us, we're saying, here's how we did it. Here's how you close this hole. Here's what you need to prevent it strategically going forward. So we're a little bit of a less disadvantage there.
Is there a pool, or is there, I guess, where does a threat come from? Is it inside? Is a threat inside the United States? Is it outside the United States? Obviously, we hear all about Russia and China, and I was over in Israel recently, and they are pros at intrusion prevention, and that's why they're the best cybersecurity in the world. Not only are they good at physically keeping folks out, but on the cyber level as well. And so, where is there a theme with where the threat comes in from?
It's a great question. So what you're really asking is really attribution, right? So who's doing the stuff, right? I think when you look at the stats, most of it comes from the United States, right? But is that by proxy? Is that real? Who knows? I think so I don't know a lot of the times. I think what I will say is that you certainly see a lot of Eastern Europe, and you see a lot of nation state stuff coming out of China and other places, and that's like varying degrees of kind of high level, high caliber stuff sometimes, and sometimes not so high caliber. But I think the more interesting thing is really, we have a pretty good slice of the world with a diverse customer base that we look at, and I think that a common misconception is that if it's vulnerable and it's out on the internet and it's available, it's exploited, right? So like if it's out there, it's just exploited. And what we find is a lot of vulnerable stuff. It's such a target-rich environment that not everything that's vulnerable gets exploited. In fact, if there's a level of difficulty to exploit something, many times it's not exploited, right? So it tells you there's a lot easier things, right? A lot easier fish to catch, so to speak. So I think that over time that will change, but I think that this whole cybersecurity problem that we have is only going to get worse before it gets better, just based on what we see every day.
Okay, that's interesting. What do you think the threats are, what they're going to look like in 5 years? How do you think the landscape of prevention is going to change? Do you think it's going to change that much, or?
I think it'll get better. So I think that if I look at the trajectory things are on now, so antivirus became next generation antivirus and advanced endpoint protection, and that space really is solving the same problem. We used to install a piece of software on our systems to prevent them from being infected, right? And now there's the next gen of that, right? Which brings a lot of other players in, and some of the old players kind of retooling and figuring these things out. So I think that prevention gets better. And I think that it's happening at a more rapid pace than it probably ever has. But I think the real challenge here is that as functionality grows, if you think about what we've been through recently, you've been through explosion of the internet, all these things connected, mobile applications, mobile phones. I mean, step back 15 years, you didn't have a phone that was a computer in your pocket that you did everything from. Right?
Everything.
Now you have the whole Internet of Things, right? Which is really internet-connected devices. Your refrigerator can be online, your cameras, really every appliance you have. All that, as that expansion grows, what we've seen is where there is that opportunity and people are developing these things, right? Products, software, all the above. As long as that rapid expansion continues, it's a target-rich environment, and security is usually an afterthought. So we quite commonly find pretty severe flaws inside, things that are categorized as Internet of Things. And it's because they're not spending the time on the security on the front end, because they're busy trying to develop something that people are going to use and consume from that standpoint. So I think overall, I think security will slowly trend upward in terms of being better, but I think that won't catch up as long as we keep expanding from a technological perspective, and the playing field keeps shifting and expanding. Right. If the expansion slows, there'll be a little bit more catch up. Security will always be a problem, though, as long as people are writing code and people are implementing things. If AI takes over and Skynet becomes self-aware,
right?
Who knows? But
do you? Obviously, I don't know if you've seen Black Mirror, but
oh yeah,
it's great.
Awesome.
But it shows you the dark side of technology, and I don't think it's so gloom and doom as people projected to be. But there definitely is, there's the robots that are coming out.
Right.
That, I mean, how involved they become with our lives. And so, then going back to the Internet of Things. So, like, I was over at the Cerner campus, over off 435, their new one. And you walk in there, and you feel like you're on a spaceship.
Yeah.
That's 150 years from now.
Yeah.
And I can see, their C-suite coming to you and saying, hey, we want to make sure that, when someone sits down for lunch and they put their smartphone on the table, it starts charging it.
Right.
But that's an access point. Isn't that a vulnerability, having all of those things connected, having everybody's personal stuff onto the corporate platform?
Yes and no. So I think you saw the trend for like bring your own device, BYOD. You heard a lot of a few years back, and look, I think that the world has shifted, right? So we're shifted in that everything's kind of more ubiquitous, right? So it's not just I expect to be on my company's network and have access to my email and the things that I use. I want them to be everywhere. So whether I'm in a Starbucks, whether I'm at home, the business demand has driven that, and there are certainly security challenges with that, and software as a service on the cloud side. People are using all these things that aren't dependent usually on where you're at. They're not on premises, right? They exist elsewhere, and I think there can be some intrinsic benefits to that, but I also think there are security risks. And one thing that we definitely see is that the business and IT in general has moved kind of that direction, and a lot of times security is kind of behind that because, again, those things just occurred, right? And you've seen this trend with like virtualization, right?
Yeah.
Over the last decade, where it just happened, right? And so you can't fight it. You just have to. The market eventually adapts. The security technologies adapt. Are there new risks that occur because of it? Absolutely. I mean, there are new risks, but it doesn't mean you can stop, right? You just have to adapt.
So how much educating do you have to do? Like when you go in and sit down with the 65-year-old CEO,
right,
who hasn't used email up until maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and you go in there and you do your audit, which you guys do, which takes a couple weeks.
Yeah, it depends. It could be months, could be weeks. Okay. Yeah.
And you are presenting these things to him or her, and what is that process hard for you? Do you feel like it's getting easier as we get farther into the future with tech being more prevalent?
I think it's getting easier. I mean, I think one thing we find is that when you speak to the C-suite, right, usually post a engagement where you're doing like a pen test or something, if that's what you're talking about. We enjoy that, right? So a lot of the business leaders are really smart. They're logical. This stuff isn't really hard to quantify. The mechanics of it and how it happened might be complex, but from a high level, you can say, listen, this is how we got in, this is what we got to, how you quantify those things. And at the end of the day, it really gets interesting to us is that, the executives want to do stuff, right? So I have a problem. How do I solve it? Here's how you solve it. So for us, I enjoy that almost sometimes more than the complexity and the muck and the mire of, kind of dealing with all the details in those cases. So it's not difficult. Yeah. And I think everyone knows that the risks exist. Just look at the news, right? I mean, so many breaches occur now that we don't even hear about because they're just overload. That I think everyone knows that cybersecurity is a problem. That's something they should, that they should be concerned with in their organizations, and they also know the consequences of not being concerned, right?
So I don't know how much you want to disclose of this, but I've worked on penetration testers. Especially on the manual side, it's very difficult to find these folks, especially in Kansas City.
Sure.
I mean, they are few and far.
Yeah.
Sounds like you guys have 10, 15?
Yeah, we're 11 people.
Okay, 11 people, and all very highly skilled.
Correct.
How have you gone about attracting, finding these folks? Has it just been all good old boy networking?
No, not really. I think it starts with, Jake Reynolds, our CTO, right? Jake kind of sets the bar for that, right? So, without Jake, it'd be really difficult. So he sets the bar. He's, a pen tester. He's, developed a lot of the methodologies that we use, and they've been developed, more by the different folks that we have. So I think it starts at the top, being able to recognize, that talent, being able to recognize what you want, what that bar is, set that bar. I think, after that, we live in kind of an interesting industry where everyone can say they're a pen tester. Everyone can come up and say, I'm an expert, I'm great at this. I have X amount of experience or, whatever certifications I may have.
Especially if you put it on your online profile.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then recruiters find it, and it's great. The guys at CSSP, awesome. For us, as we kind of, organically, which everything's been really organic growth, scaled and, brought another person on the assessment team and so on and so forth, the bar was set, right? So you couldn't easily just back down from that, right? Because of it's intrinsic to who we are. So, some of our team members are from out of town. They're moved here. So it's very common, as you know, for pen testers to work remotely in a basement, kind of autonomously.
Very common.
And be connected, via Slack or Teams or whatever people are using. For us, we still believe in proximity. Maybe we're just old. But, we relocated people to Kansas City. We looked long and hard for people. We're really rigorous. And we kind of set a bar. And the benefits of that are our team has taken our work and our level of quality and efficacy to the things that we do to a whole new level. Not because they're just competitive with each other, which is great too, because you get a lot of smart people in the room that are talented and they feed off each other, and it's like a cultural thing. And it's not something that we necessarily create, but the bar was set and it just kind of continued. And so for us, that's really key to this, is like the culture of the company and the bar, right? Because the second you dilute yourself, you kind of lose some integrity. And look, you can, in our industry, you can do work that isn't great. You can do okay work. We don't want to do okay work. We want to do great work. We want people to be shocked by the things that we find, and we want to be the guys that find the things that other people don't. And so far, we've been, very fortunate with a lot of hard work and been able to do that. And that's kind of the core of what we are, and that's why it's important to do so. But it really starts with, the moment you hire a B player, they hire C, D, and F players. You need to have A players, and we really, truly have A players. We're fortunate enough in that regard.
And in order to get that high quality product or service, you have to bring in those high quality people.
Correct.
that are at that senior level. Have you ever taken more of a chance and brought in a more junior level, mid-level person, and then had them trained up or given them a mentor? And what did that process look like?
So what's strange is we've never said that, hey, we want to have that kind of a junior level talent person come in. At the same time, we've hired based on aptitude instead of just everyone would love a fully foreign person with all the experience you want to come in. Some of our most clear-cut, like rock star, cases with that, were someone that came in usually with a lot of IT experience and said, "Look, I can do this," and really flourished, right, and blew us away and accelerated at a level that we could have never even imagined or hoped for. And so that's the closest we came to like junior level, but it wasn't junior level talent. It was just senior level talent from a different sector as opposed to just being a security person. It was more infrastructure, IT knowledge. And then just being able to just learning curve and just get there quick.
What kind of advice would you have? Someone is 17, 18 years old, or maybe a little bit older, maybe a junior, senior in college, they have a computer science degree, or they're really wanting to get into cybersecurity. Because I'll get a lot of parents that say, "Hey, I want my kid to get into tech," and I usually say, "Okay, get into software development, or get into cybersecurity."
Yeah.
Because they're going to be set up on either one. And so how do you go about immersing yourself in it to get at the right level to where you can find it, land in a place like depth?
I think the key is nowadays there's a lot of resources online. So you can literally learn this stuff. You can study it. You can get really good at it, or at least practice by readily available sources. It's not like some dark art, right? That is ever secretive. The community, the kind of white hat, hacker, whatever you want to call them, community is very community driven. They share information, they share tools, so that stuff exists. I think certain certifications like offensive securities, the OCP and OCE are really, really great because they're more hands-on kind of practical exams that give you a good basis. But I think it really comes down to trying to do as much investigation research, go into the community kind of groups, like, there's SecKC in Kansas City is a good one, and you've got, the ISC Squared meetup that's a little bit more, I think, senior level in those cases. But reach out to the community, read, absorb what's happening, and the best case scenario is get a job in the, in the industry. Intern if someone has to and they're really, really young. But the sooner that you can kind of get into that ecosystem and understand what's there, the sooner you can kind of rise and get exposure to those things. But I definitely think the most impressive thing for us is that people that may have not been in information security, we see a lot of them, right? That say, I really want to get in. And Some will come to you and say, well, I've done X, Y, and Z, which shows a lot of initiative. And others will say, well, I graduated school with my comp sci degree and I want to get into cybersecurity. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And they've been out of it for a year. It's like, just take some initiative
Yeah.
and go do it, and you'll get there. The resources exist, and they're far more
Yeah.
plentiful now than they ever have been.
How many of those 11 guys and girls have a degree?
That's a good question. I think by and large, most.
Most.
Right? Yeah, I think most.
And was it cybersecurity or computer science?
No, not
related?
cybersecurity. No, I think some comp sci kind of development background, that type of thing. Others kind of all across the board. Jake Reynolds, our CTO, did not have a college degree. Just high aptitude guy.
Right.
Got a CCIE at
Right.
like 20 or something.
Jeez.
Just really one of those guys that can go get it. So I think the one thing that's pervasive about IT and security is this way now. So IT, when I kind of grew up in it, was like you got paid for what you could do, right? What you can accomplish. Right. It wasn't necessarily seniority based or, do you have your MBA? And there's certainly jobs that have prerequisites for those things. And I think education's great. But I think cybersecurity is that way now too. Yes, if you want to go to management, you probably need, some type of degree. That is a barrier of entry. At the same time, I've met some really, really talented people. They just get it done, and they get paid to get it done, and they can ascend.
Wow. Okay. So, how often do you travel around the country to interact with clients? And do you do any work outside of the United States?
So we do. We joke that our territory is Earth. So we have customers kind of all over the place. Our clients exist in concentrations in Boston and New York, and certainly many, many in Kansas City, which has been a focus for us. Some overseas as well. So we work with some organizations that are very large. So they have presence kind of all over the globe. We do get out. So certain customers will come to us. Clients will say, "Listen, we have a speaking engagement we want you to do." So I'll go out for those. Sometimes we'll be doing work out on site. A lot of the work we do is remote now. It's not so much on site there too, but I usually travel around to most of our clients, once a year at some point for the ones who are out of town, other places.
Where's your favorite place to go?
I love going back to New York. It's fun. I really like Boston, both places I live, so I really enjoy it. But honestly, I like, getting out of town and going and seeing different things, different people is really great. We don't do it as much as we used to. We used to be pretty road dogs, doing a lot of work all over the place. But I like it all, but I love the East Coast. It's kind of my place,
Yeah, I prefer the East Coast.
Yeah.
Versus the West. So, how what I've seen is throughout my life in Kansas City is trends that happen on the coast takes a couple of years for it to work its way into the middle. And when you're out there interacting, you could go to New York or go to LA. What does cybersecurity look like compared to Kansas City? Is there much of a difference?
I think fundamentally, no. I think, when you look at, I think the coasts get a little bit like, a busy, bustling city like Boston or New York. I think that vendors typically will have a presence there first. So a lot of times they'll be more privy to kind of the heavy sales pitch from new technologies first. So it's no surprise when I look back in the history of depth, sometimes I hear about, a piece of software, right, that a customer has been pitched in New York City or in Boston that I've never heard of before. And then 5 years later, they're getting acquired by Cisco because it's like, the hottest thing out there.
Yeah, it's wild how all that goes down.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, at the same time, I think that, not to disparage the coast by any means, I think that the Midwest, right, unlike maybe other parts of the country, I mean, I think what you said is true, right? So things hit on the coast. You look at, arts, entertainment, music, that kind of stuff. It all kind of coalesces on the coast first a lot of times. But I think in some ways the Midwest, kind of the Midwest work ethic, right? I think I've seen some really, really innovative and progressive things in the Midwest that I haven't seen in places like New York or LA.
Right.
And I think that kind of gets forgotten sometimes. But there's been some companies I've walked into with very, very mature cybersecurity programs that aren't financials, right? In the Midwest that have really surprised me over the years too. So I don't think it's always true that we're always behind by any means, but I think that certainly the coast and the larger cities get more attention than some underserved markets in the Midwest.
Do you ever get discredited if you go in, say you have a meeting in, I don't know, in Baltimore, and they're like, "You guys are from Kansas City. What do you know about cybersecurity? We should be working with a company out in Silicon Valley.
We secure cows. That's what I tell them now. Not really. I mean, I'm sure it's happened. People usually aren't that forthright to say, "Listen, I don't trust these guys from Kansas City." So typically not. I think especially in this day and age, over the last probably 6 or 7 years, people are so used to, doing meetings online with someone from another city. It's not as localized as it is, so people are open to that too. Certainly, organizations will have an affinity to work with people in their backyard. We benefit from that greatly in the Kansas City metro area, but we have concentrations of customers kind of all over. So I don't see that as an inhibitor by any means. Certainly, I wish I could go grab lunch with my customers in Boston as often as I do, the ones in Kansas City, and service them, be more close to them from a proximity standpoint. But I've never been aware of that being an issue.
Right. Have you seen the proposal for the Hyperloop between here and St. Louis?
I have.
They were saying 51,000 passengers per day.
It'd be awesome.
So that's where AUX and didnt are going to have their second offices.
That's right,
St. Louis,
there. Yeah.
Well, you literally could have morning meetings here.
Yeah.
And then you could have afternoon meetings in St. Louis.
Yeah, it's a problem. As you probably sometimes makes more sense to just drive to St. Louis than fly. Right? It's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other, and you have a couple meetings there, and you're kind of wasting a day at that point too. So yeah, I also think the Hyperloop and that kind of transportation is really interesting in that what it does geographically to where people live. Right, so certain destinations in between Kansas City and St. Louis, for instance. I don't know what the stops will look like there, but imagine living 2 hours out but being 5 minutes away.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Because it's nothing but rural towns. There's Jefferson City and then there's Columbia.
Yeah.
But, I can't think of any other major towns.
Yeah, and I guess it all depends, again, on where the stops are, right? And if it's all the way straight through like an express, then probably doesn't make much sense. But I think that's really, really interesting. And I also think like autonomous cars are interesting in that, as that technology gets better, can you be, working on your way to work if you live an hour away? Well, that makes the drive a lot more productive, at that point. I like driving. I live in the city. I work in the city, so I don't drive like far. I drive less than most people do distance-wise, but I really like driving. It's kind of zen time. But it'd be cool to be like, car, take me to work and take the long route. I'm going to, work on whatever.
Yeah, and then you can bust out your laptop and with all the Wi-Fi going on, you can get, 3 hours of work done.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of traveling between our office down in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this for the past couple of years, is how beneficial an autonomous car would be.
Oh, yeah.
Especially because we love our large SUVs here in this part of the country.
Yeah.
So it'd be very beneficial. But the Hyperloop gets me excited.
Yeah.
I really hope it happens within the next 5-10 years.
Yeah.
I don't know how realistic that is.
I don't know. Have they even decided that? They're still kind of. It hasn't been approved or anything, right?
Hasn't been approved. I know the plans are submitted, and I think that's a really good step.
It'd be cool. Have you ever ridden like on the Acela between like New York or Boston?
I have.
Yeah. So that was. It wasn't the most efficient travel, so it wasn't as fast. Obviously.
Are you talking about the Amtrak?
Yeah, the Amtrak, right.
We had one right at my university.
Yeah.
And we could hop on that and be in Boston in 2 hours.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like that in Kansas City.
No, there isn't. And the cool thing about that is you really got the benefit you could work on it. Take calls, do your thing. So that was, kind of akin to this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because you could go, I think Kansas City could be a little hub for this Hyperloop.
Yeah.
Because it's all about being flat.
Yep.
And
we got that covered.
We got that covered. You don't drill through mountains.
Yep.
So, I started thinking, okay, well, you could do one down to Wichita, down to Oklahoma. Heck, you can even do one out of Dallas.
Yeah.
Up towards the Dakotas.
Yeah.
And, then it's like, we're obviously connected by the internet.
Yep.
But now we're going to be even more connected physically.
Yeah.
And you could live in, if there's a Hyperloop in South Dakota, and it takes you, if it only takes, I think it's like 40 minutes to get
St. Louis.
Yeah. So South Dakota would probably be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
People would be living in South Dakota and commuting into Kansas City.
It'd be cool.
It'd be so cool.
Yeah. I think Kansas City, outside of like Hyperloop or transportation, I think the interesting thing here in living different places, let's see if you agree. I think the most special thing about Kansas City is it's bigger than most people realize, in terms of like population in the metro. We've got a lot of different types of scenery. You got very kind of urban city. You can live in the burbs. You've got kind of a variety of different things going on. You know, you don't have mountains. You don't have the ocean, right? Nothing like you know, other places. But I think it's interesting is that Kansas City feels unexploited to me in that I think other cities are almost, you know, you look at New York City, like
they're transient.
Yeah, they're transient, and it's like every opportunity has been uncovered, regardless of what, right? Be it that real estate opportunities, whatever it is. Kansas City is still it's a city, but it's kind of a town feel.
Oh yeah.
And I think what we have going for us here is that you got a lot of, you know, progressive, hardworking people in Kansas City. The city's growing. The urban core is growing, right? We're in the crossroads. So for us, you know, we love being in the city. We've been in the city since we started. And I think that's special. And I think it's unique in that it just seems like there's a lot more momentum to be had from where we're at today, which is exciting.
I think you hit it spot on. I hope we never lose that. That's
Yeah.
my favorite thing about this city is that there's this pride thing going on.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of foreigners. You know, the most outsiders we have are from Iowa.
Right.
I meet a new Iowan every single weekend, and that's great. And they have more of the core values that we have here in Kansas City, and you know, there's all talks about talent shortages and getting people in here, and you've relocated people, and how do you grow with still keeping your flavor?
You know, I think it's all just an organic thing, right? I think that, you know, Kansas City's more diverse than it's ever been, right? I think that, you know, when you look at places like Denver, which is on the other end of the exploitation side, right? Because, you know, lots of people from LA moved to Denver. And I heard a stat, I don't know if it's real, you know, or true rather, you know, a few years ago that said that Kansas City is the second place that people from Los Angeles move, second most common besides like Denver.
Really?
Yeah.
They go,
because they're going east.
LA's people's second option is Kansas City.
That's what I hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I'm making stuff up.
No, yeah.
But no, I did hear that. And I have met a lot of people from LA that have come here. You know,
interesting.
You know the real estate cost of living here is really good. You're centrally located, so you can get places. But no, I mean, I think that I think Kansas City's getting more diverse. But I hear what you're saying about like we don't want that to stop. So if you lived in Kansas City and you've been alive, you know, as long as some of us have, you know, you've kind of seen this start-stop thing happen in Kansas City, Missouri, and I mean Kansas City Metro. It's called, you know, kind of all of it. So the Kansas side, Missouri side, in that you saw like development occur and then it stops and we kind of regress a little bit. I think it's here to stay. I mean, you look at downtown Kansas City has never occurred. And the other thing is the areas that the development has happened, they haven't always been planned, right? So like the crossroads occurred, right?
Yeah.
The city didn't plan it. It just kind of happened with, you know, some people that kind of were essentially the pioneers of it, and they kind of started that.
And downtown's been planned.
And downtown's been planned, like, you know, Power and Light, and kind of all those areas. You know, River Market, they've tried to jumpstart. I think the streetcar is really, really good for everything. You look at areas like, you know, 16th and 17th and Summit, like kind of the arts area there. That kind of developed outside of any plans of the city. So we've got multiple different kind of areas that are about different things. Some are arts driven, some are business driven. And that's exciting to see for someone that's lived in Kansas City for as long as I have, because I've never seen the momentum. That's why I don't think it'll ever stop now.
It's awesome, exciting. There's a buzz. There's a, you know, when I use New York City, I don't want to compare us, but when you're there, it's almost like the concrete is buzzing, like everything.
There's an energy.
There's an energy. And we don't have that.
It's not the same thing, but
you can feel that.
Look, two days ago, I was in the Crossroads Hotel that they just opened up. It's an old Pabst Blue Ribbon like factory or bottling place, right? New hotel. You literally feel like you walk into New York City in that place. It is awesome. It's a great vibe. It's right around the corner from our office. And it's so cool to see stuff like that in Kansas City when you see places that remind you of other places that are as cool as New York City.
Right.
And that's really awesome to see. You know, even you know, like the scooters, right? Like the limes.
God, they're everywhere.
You know, I used to think that those things were funny, and I look pretty funny on them. You know, a 6'6" guy rolling around on a lime or whatever. But you know, it's pretty cool.
At least no one's going to hit you.
Yeah. Or if they do, I might survive. But, you know, the interesting thing is I had a couple meetings one day, and I was like, I'm not going to drive over there. You know, just across you know, several blocks away from
Yeah.
us. So I rode one of the scooters over, and it was awesome. I was like, and you see people out all the time there too. So I know what you mean. It's palpable, like the energy in Kansas City. You know, there's nightlife that's happening. More people live downtown. We have grocery stores and places that kind of sustain that kind of living down there too. So no, I love it, and I think it's here to stay, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, and I heard from the streetcar. It was to solve the public transportation issue, and it didn't really turn out. It's more of a let's bring the kids
It's a novelty,
downtown,
yeah.
and let's go ride the streetcar like it's a roller coaster, and that's what it's turned to, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it's just funny because I don't think they really planned for that. And then you have something like these the scooters.
Yeah.
I mean, those are extremely efficient.
Yeah.
And you leave it to private entrepreneurship to come up with this efficient way to solve a big chunk of the public transportation.
Well, and so here's the thing. I think that when you look at the kind of solving of the public transportation, we have a bus system, right? It's underutilized, right, in Kansas City, Missouri. You had the MAX, if you've seen those buses too. So when it was initially proposed as like hey, let's solve the transportation issue, like let's be real for a second. It's 2.2 miles.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like we're afraid of walking,
Yeah.
right? Like it's 2.2 miles, not that far, right? It's right now today it's from, the River Market to basically Crown Center, right? And so I wasn't really for it at first. I thought this is crazy. It was like a couple $100 million. I mean, you could buy a fleet of Lamborghinis and charter people back and forth in them, right, for less. But what I think is interesting is that you're right. I don't think it solves the transportation issue necessarily, although I think it helps, right? Certainly not in mass. I think extending it to the plaza, as they've talked about, and I think approved now, makes a lot of sense, right? I think that what it has done is that that streetcar route can't change like a bus route can. So it gives businesses confidence to say, great, I want to open up retail along this route. It ups property values along there because they know that those rails are in the ground and they're staying. I think it could have been implemented better, maybe. I think it's kind of funny. It stops at red lights and that kind of stuff. But you're right. I mean, it's packed every weekend. It's really clean. It seems to be run very, very well. And I think the city's benefited from it. And look, at the end of the day, it's also like, if we're going to spend a couple $100 million on something, maybe that's good enough or whatever it is too. So I've really shifted because I've seen people use it. I've seen, I go to a barber shop in the River Market that I've gone to for 20 years. I've been there since like long before I was alive in the 60s. But like the River Market is different because of the streetcar.
Oh, absolutely.
Because people can come for lunch down there and get back without parking. So no, I think there's a lot of really cool stuff going downtown, and we're just happy to kind of be in it and part of it.
Well, I was fortunate enough. I moved downtown in 2014, like literally the same time they were starting to lay down tracks.
Yeah,
and I was down there for 2 years, and I saw from the full life cycle of that streetcar from start to finish.
Yeah,
and the first 6 months when they were just, they spent almost I think 9 months tearing up the street.
Yeah.
And they found, the sewage system was over 100 years old.
Yeah.
And it was crumbling.
Yep.
So they had to go back and fix that.
Yep.
And then you had every single business on Main Street. It's on Main Street, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
They're, I go in there, I walk over. They're like, oh my gosh, like we're going to have business. We're just barely hanging on. And now look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, people are dying to get on to have real estate along that.
They are, but
stop.
Some of the businesses that have been there as a mainstay, right? So a lot of the businesses along Main Street, if they owned the building, it became a real estate venture for them as the property went up. But if they didn't, I mean, they literally suffered a lot during the construction. So that's kind of the cost of entry. But I saw that as well. I mean, you did see businesses go out of business.
Yeah.
Right? 'Cause there's no parking, there's nothing there, right?
How long have you guys had your building in the Crossroads?
So we just bought our building at 2131 Washington in January.
Okay.
But we've been in pretty much the Crossroads area or downtown, let's say, since 2006.
Wow. And how cheap was the real estate in 2006 compared to what it is now?
A lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is 2006 was before the kind of crash. So I remember putting an offer in on a kind of a building for us really, really early on in the Crossroads, and giving them full asking price, and they wanted more, and I declined the offer. And the funny thing is that was a kind of a smaller place than we have now. It was artificially high because it was 7 or whatever, right? But the property value is going up like crazy. I mean, things like Crossroads Hotel going in, people investing money,
right?
Especially in areas where there's kind of lower quantity, right? So like Crossroads is limited amount of space. The West Side is coming up, so West Crossroads. So like west of Broadway, all the way to basically the cliffs there too.
Like past Grinders?
The other way.
Oh,
So
I'm
that's,
sorry.
That's east.
I'm
So East
sorry.
Crossroads is getting cool too. So East Crossroads where all the breweries and stuff
by
are.
West Side Story and up by Summit, 17th Summit.
But even further down, right? So like, I'm trying to think what's over there. Like, there's you have Summit and all the kind of nicer houses there, and then you go kind of down the street towards Southwest Boulevard from there.
Yeah.
And that area, starting to kind of come up.
It's
too.
like Little Mexico.
Yeah, but it's all starting to kind of there's construction starting to get nice, and ultimately there's only so much kind of geography in Kansas City, Missouri to deal with. So east side you can go a long ways, and you're starting to see that get nice. Even past Troost, really nice developments happening. So the city's getting bigger. There's more to offer there, but on all fronts, I mean, it's markedly different. And from a real estate standpoint, I mean, it's much higher now than it was 10 years ago. It'll be crazier in 10 years. I mean, kind of sky's the limit.
What do you think's going to happen to the West Bottoms? I was just down there late last week.
I think the better question is what's happened to the West Bottoms,
Yeah.
right? So let's evaluate. So West Bottoms was, where the haunted houses were. They had,
I love those, by the way.
Yeah, in the big flood in the 90s, right? The bottoms flooded, right? So did Southwest Boulevard. The flooding was actually due to some pumps that were already installed not being maintained properly, I think, right?
Didn't know that.
Little known fact, as far as a year or two ago, the West Bottoms, that area is the safest area in Kansas City, Missouri, because they have their own private security force too.
Wow.
And so what you've seen at West Bottoms is kind of that cultural renaissance that's occurred in other parts of the city where kind of all the antique shops moved down there. They're, first Saturdays now.
Yep.
It's kind of like their first Friday thing.
Right.
Lots of big buildings there too, cool bars. There's like the Ship down there if you've been down there, the axe throwing place. There's like cool stuff going on down there. So West Bottoms is exciting to see. It's definitely way different than it was 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. I think if they can make it more accessible from downtown West Crossroads into the West Bottoms, it's gonna link it together.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they need to build some new roads or.
I mean, you got 12th Street down now, right? You can go the other way around, right, from the highway. So I don't know. I mean, there is like a back way that I've seen them working on too, into kind of the West Bottoms with another bridge. I forgot what it's called, but I mean, I still think parts of Kansas City, like the West Bottoms, are segmented enough that there's still a destination. You kind of have to drive there. I mean, you're not going to like get there. Whereas when you think about like Crossroads, downtown, Midtown, River Market, those areas are now being connected by the streetcar, going back to that, which makes it all much, much more accessible for everyone. So I think there'll always be those destination places, but the West Bottoms is a resounding success at least from my standpoint. I think it's going to continue to develop there.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yep.
So you guys have your single office in Kansas City.
Yep.
Is there talks about a second office? Is there even a need?
There isn't necessarily a need,
right?
But as our team grows and our customer base grows in other places too. I mean, I wouldn't see it kind of outside the realm of possibility to open a kind of an office in some other city. There's not a defined plan for that yet, but we're kind of as the opportunity presents itself, we may kind of go that direction at some point. It's not our goal, but it may happen.
What do you think the benefits are of opening another office in the city? Is it to focus on specific clients in that city?
Probably. I think just having a presence locally, as we get, we talked about the benefits of kind of being the local player. I think you establish yourself as someone that's local there, and you can service those clients more effectively because you're there in person. Kind of develop those relationships. So I think a company that is headquartered in Denver might be more apt to work with a Denver-based company than they would a company in Kansas City,
right?
And vice versa. So I think that's where it does make sense. At the same time, I think what's silly is I see a lot of some competitors, some in different industries as us, that like they got 50 offices all over the country, and they're just one guy in his house, and they're trying to make themselves look bigger than they are. And I think that's kind of silly too. So I'd like it to be like an actual real thing as opposed to perceived, right?
Yeah.
You can go get a bunch of mailboxes right now and say you're in a bunch of cities.
No, you can't. It's a little silly.
Yeah.
But no, it's interesting. Man, this has been really beneficial.
Thanks.
I've learned so much from you.
Thanks for having me. It was
Yeah,
fun.
it was a really good time, and I'm really excited to hopefully do this another year, 2 years, and kind of see how things have changed. Because we're
cool.
we're in hyper growth, and so are you, and so is the city. And
Yep.
but guys, if you guys want to reach out to Gene, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn and,
Yep.
and some of my platforms, and we can maybe connect some dots. But other than that, man, it's been a pleasure.
That'd be awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. All right. That was good.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Boy, that went quick.
What was it? A little less than an hour and a half? Yeah.